Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're getting into the story of one of the most, I think, compelling figures in all of ancient philosophy.
Absolutely. A man whose life was in itself the most powerful argument for his ideas.
We're talking about Epictetus. He was a Greek Stoic philosopher, lived from about 50 to 135 AD, and our mission today is to really unpack his life, his teachings, and, well, the incredible story of how we even know about him at all.
And that story starts with a paradox, a really stunning piece of irony that you just can't ignore. Our sources for this, they're mainly biographical bits and pieces, plus the philosophical notes taken from his lectures.
The famous Discourses and the Enchiridion.
Exactly. And what they show is a man who was, in the legal sense, property. He was a slave.
Yeah.
Yet he became the intellectual guide for the people who had all the power in the world, including Roman emperors.
And that tension, that right there, is what we want you to walk away with today. This isn't just a deep dive into some abstract theory.
No, not at all.
You're going to see Stoicism being forged under the most extreme pressure imaginable. The whole point is to really get that foundational concept of Stoicism. The split between what you can control and what you absolutely can't.
Yeah, we're going to see it through the eyes of a man who lived that split every single day.
We're going to dig into the details, the surprising stuff, the meaning of his name, for instance, which is just, wow.
That's unbelievable.
The story behind his physical disability and the sheer dedication of his student, Arrian, who's the only reason we're even having this conversation.
Without Arrian, Epictetus would just be a name. His life was the lesson, and Arrian was one who wrote it down.
Okay, so let's get into it. Let's start at the beginning. To understand Epictetus's philosophy, you have to understand his life. The context is everything. And it starts with, of all things, his name.
Right. So he was born around 50 A.D. in a place called Hierapolis in Phrygia. That's in modern-day Turkey.
But the name we know him by, Epictetus, that wasn't his birth name, was it?
No. We have no idea what name his parents gave him. The name Epictetus isn't really a name in that sense. It's a Greek word, Epictetos.
And it means what exactly?
It means gained or acquired.
Wow, so acquired property?
Literally, yes. Plato even used that exact term in his work to talk about property that you add to what you've already inherited. So this man, who would go on to teach the world about inner freedom and self-possession, his very identity, the name everyone called him, was a label that meant chattel, something I own.
That's an incredible mental burden to carry around every single day.
Or, for a Stoic, the perfect training ground. It forces that distinction, doesn't it, between the external label the world puts on you and the internal reality you choose for yourself. And he experienced this up close during his youth in Rome.
Because he was a slave there.
He was a slave to a man named Epictetus. And you have to understand who this Epictetus was. This wasn't just some random wealthy Roman. He was a freedman, meaning he had been a slave himself. And he'd risen to an incredible position of power. He was the secretary for correspondence to Emperor Nero.
Wait, to Nero?
To Nero himself. So Epictetus wasn't just, a slave in some quiet country estate. He was living and working right in the nerve center of the Roman Empire, in the household of a man who was one of the emperor's closest administrators.
That's a mind-boggling social position to be in.
It's what we call the paradox of status. Legally, he's at the absolute bottom of the social ladder. He's property. But in terms of proximity, he's at the very top. He's right there in the orbit of one of the most powerful and, frankly, one of the most unstable and dangerous men in the world.
He would have seen everything. The luxury, the absolute power.
And the paranoia, the fear, the incredible fragility of it all. He saw firsthand that Nero, this man who could order anyone's death on a whim, was himself a slave to his own passions, his own anger, his own insecurities.
That must have been the ultimate lesson, that external power means nothing if your internal world is a mess.
Exactly. It proved his later teachings. He saw that the emperor had no control over the one thing that truly mattered, his own character. And Epictetus, the slave, did.
And somehow in the middle of all this, he found philosophy.
He did. And this is a point in his master's favor, I suppose. Epictetus gave him permission to study. Maybe he saw it as a good investment, making his slave more valuable.
Who did he study with?
Musonius Rufus, a huge name in Roman Stoicism, a really respected teacher. And this was Epictetus's lifeline. Getting that education, it was more than just learning. It started to change his status, even as a slave. It was his first taste of real freedom, the freedom of the mind.
Which he would need, given what happened to him physically. His disability is one of the most famous parts of his story, but there are conflicting accounts, right?
Very conflicting, and they each tell a different powerful story. The most famous one, the one you hear most often, comes to us from a writer named Celsus.
And what's that version?
It's brutal. The story goes that his master, Epictetus, was twisting his leg for some reason, maybe as a punishment, maybe just out of cruelty. And as he was doing it, Epictetus supposedly said very calmly, "You will break it."
Wow.
And when the bone snapped, he just looked at his master and said, "I told you you would break it."
That story it's the perfect illustration of the Stoic ideal, isn't it? The complete detachment of the mind from the suffering of the body.
It's the ultimate practical exam for a Stoic. If it's true, it's a moment of just horrific cruelty. But for Epictetus, it was a moment of total philosophical victory. He proved that his master could break his body, but could not touch his mind, his judgment.
But there is another version of the story.
There is. Much later, the philosopher Simplicius wrote that Epictetus had been disabled since he was a child, that it was due to some illness or condition he was born with.
So we don't actually know for sure.
We don't. And in a way, that almost makes the point even stronger. Because whether the damage was inflicted by a cruel human being or just by random chance, by fortune, to Epictetus, it made no difference.
It was an external event.
Yeah.
Beyond his control.
Precisely. And so it was something to be accepted, not raged against. His philosophy wasn't some idea he read in a book. It was tested on his own leg.
His life takes another huge turn after Nero dies in 68 AD.
Yes. After that whole chaotic period, the year of the 4 emperors, Epictetus eventually gained his freedom. He was manumitted.
So now he's a free man, a former slave, a philosopher living and teaching in Rome.
He starts his own school, right
Yeah.
there in the city where he'd been bought and sold. But Roman politics are never that simple. His career in Rome didn't last long.
What happened?
The Emperor Domitian. Around AD 93, Domitian, who was famously paranoid and autocratic, got it in his head that philosophers were a threat, that they encouraged independent thinking and, dissent.
Who just kicked him out?
He banished all philosophers from Rome, just like that, an imperial decree. And Epictetus was one of them.
It's the same pattern again, a massive external event, completely beyond his control, changing his life.
And once again, what looks like a disaster turns into the single most important moment of his career. He was forced to leave Italy, so he moved to a place called Nicopolis in western Greece.
And that's where he set up the school that he became famous for.
That's it. This is where he founded his own major philosophical school. The banishment, which was meant to silence him, actually gave him the platform that secured his legacy. In Nicopolis, he wasn't just another teacher in a busy city. He was the authority. This is where the lectures, the discourses were given.
And what was his life like there? Did he, cash in on his fame?
The complete opposite. He lived a life of extreme simplicity, very few possessions. He was practicing what he preached, that happiness comes from virtue, not from external things. A simple house, a straw mat, an oil lamp. That was about it.
But there's that one story that kind of pushes back against the idea of the Stoic as this cold, detached person.
Oh, it's one of my favorite anecdotes about him. It's so humanizing. For most of his life, he lived alone. But when he was an old man, a friend of his had a child and was going to abandon it, which was unfortunately a common practice.
And Epictetus stepped in.
He did. He couldn't let the child die. So he adopted this infant and raised him. He even brought in a woman to help him. We don't know if they were married. The sources are vague. But they shared the duty of caring for this child.
That's not detachment. That's active engagement with the world. He took on a huge responsibility because it was the right thing to do.
It shows that for Epictetus, Stoicism wasn't about running away from your duties. It was about fulfilling them virtuously. It wasn't about being unfeeling. It was about having your feelings guided by reason and compassion.
He lived to be quite old, right? About 85.
Around that, yeah. He died about 135 AD. And there's a final story about his lamp that says everything about the reputation he'd built.
The oil lamp he used for studying.
That's the one. Just a simple, cheap iron lamp.
Yeah.
After he died, an admirer bought it at auction for 3,000 drachmae.
Which was a huge amount of money.
An astronomical sum for an ordinary lamp. Its only value was that it had belonged to him. It just goes to show the man who was named acquired property had, in the end, acquired something priceless. A reputation for wisdom that people would, well, literally pay a fortune for.
So we have the man, we have the life. Let's pivot now to the ideas themselves. The philosophy that this incredible life produced. He insisted, didn't he, that philosophy wasn't just something you think about.
Not at all. That was his core conviction. For Epictetus, philosophy was a techne. That's a Greek word that means a craft, a skill, like being a carpenter or a doctor. It's something you do. It's a way of life.
Not just a theory.
No. If your studies didn't result in you living a better, more virtuous life, then you were just wasting your time. It was knowledge for immediate, practical application.
And where did he say you should start? What's the first step?
Self-knowledge, but a very specific kind of self-knowledge. He said the absolute beginning of all philosophy is to become convinced of your own ignorance.
So admitting you don't know anything.
And more than that, admitting your own gullibility. Realizing how easily you're fooled by your first impressions, by what other people say, by what society tells you is important. He said that had to be the first subject you study. The weaknesses and flaws in your own thinking.
And once you've done that, you can get to his central idea, the one that, changes everything.
The great dividing line. The dichotomy of control. It's the absolute foundation of his entire system. And it sounds simple, but it is radical.
Okay, lay it out for us.
His argument is this. Some things in the universe are up to us, and some things are not. Everything external, your health, your wealth, your reputation, what other people do, whether it rains tomorrow, all of that is ultimately beyond your control.
So you have to accept it.
You have to accept it calmly and without judgment. It is what it is. To fight against it is not only useless, it's a form of insanity. It's like a dog barking at the tide.
So this is where people get the idea that Stoicism is about being passive or fatalistic, just accepting whatever bad things happen.
Right, and that is the single biggest misunderstanding of Epictetus. It's a huge misreading. Because he contrasts that acceptance with an area of ferocious, absolute individual responsibility.
The things that are up to us.
Exactly. The only things that are truly in our power are internal. Our judgments about things, our opinions, our desires, our aversions, the decisions we make. He used a special term for this, proheresis. It's often translated as our moral purpose or our will. That, he said, is the only thing that is truly yours.
So his broken leg was not up to him.
Not up to him, but his judgment about the broken leg, whether he saw it as a catastrophe that ruined his life or simply a fact about his body that didn't affect his character, that was 100% up to him.
It's an incredibly active philosophy, then. The work is constant.
It's strenuous. It's a constant training of your mind to examine your impressions, to challenge your automatic reactions, and to only give your assent to rational, virtuous judgments. The goal isn't to change the world outside. It's to build what Marcus Aurelius would later call an inner citadel, a fortress inside your mind that no external event can ever breach.
And to make this practical, Epictetus didn't just give his students a big idea. He gave them a structure, a kind of curriculum for how to study philosophy.
Yes, a three-part framework. And the order is the most important thing about it, because it shows you his priorities. It tells you what matters most.
So what's at the top? What's the most essential part?
Part 1. He called it the application of doctrine. This is the goal. It's all about how you should act. It's ethics in practice. The simple stuff, like you should not lie, you should be fair to your neighbors, you should fulfill your duties. This is the output. This is what a philosophical life actually looks like in the real world.
Okay, so it starts with action, but if that's the goal, why do you need the other two parts?
Because just following rules isn't enough. You need to understand why. So part 2 is reasons. This is the theory behind the practice. It explains the principles. Why shouldn't you lie? Because it harms your moral character, your proheresias. Why should you be fair? Because humans are social creatures meant to cooperate. This part gives you the solid foundation so you're not just blindly obeying.
So part 1 is the what to do, and part 2 is the why you do it.
Precisely. And that leads to the final, and in his view, the least important part.
Which is?
Part 3. Logic or establishment. This is the technical side of philosophy. It's where you learn how to analyze arguments, spot fallacies, and establish that the reasons you came up with in part 2 are actually valid and sound. It's about making sure your thinking is clear and not based on mistakes.
So it's like a quality control for your principles.
The perfect way to put it. It's quality control.
Uh-huh.
But here's his crucial point. Part 3 is only necessary because of part 2, and part 2 is only necessary because of part 1. The logic serves the principles, and the principles serve the action.
He was worried people would get stuck in the logic part, wasn't he?
Deeply worried. He saw it all the time. Students who were brilliant at debating logical puzzles but were, still dishonest or cowardly in their actual lives. He said that's like a builder who spends all his time studying blueprints and learning how to make perfect measurements, but never actually builds the house.
The point is to live in the house.
The point is to live the good life. The logic is just the scaffolding. It's a tool to help you build, but it's not the building itself. If your philosophy doesn't make you a better person, then for Epictetus, it's completely worthless.
That's a powerful challenge. Okay, so we have the life, we have the core philosophy. Now we get to maybe the most amazing part of the story. How any of this survived.
Yeah, this is the historical miracle. Given how much Epictetus stressed that philosophy was a lived practice, an oral tradition between a teacher and a student.
He didn't write any of it down himself.
Not a single word that we know of, no original works. The only reason we can talk about the Discourses or the Enchiridion today is because of one person, his student, Arrian.
Tell us about Arrian.
Arrian was a Greek who became a prominent Roman official and historian. He studied with Epictetus in Nicopolis around the year 108. And he was just completely captivated. He realized he was in the presence of someone extraordinary, and he made it his personal mission to preserve what he was hearing.
So he basically became a stenographer?
That's exactly how he described his own project. He claimed that he wrote down what he heard, word for word, as best I could. He said he wasn't trying to compose a book, but to create a memorial of his teacher's way of thinking and his frankness of speech. He was trying to capture the live performance.
And that tells you a lot about how Epictetus must have taught. It wasn't a dry lecture.
No. Arrian says he was this incredibly powerful, charismatic speaker. He could induce his listener to feel just what Epictetus wanted him to feel. It was dynamic, it was personal, it was probably challenging. He was trying to provoke a change in the people sitting in front of him.
And Arrian's notes became the 2 books we have today.
That's right. He compiled the Discourses, which are the longer, more detailed classroom conversations. We think there were originally 8 books of those, but only 4 have survived.
And the other one?
That's the Enchiridion, which means handbook or manual. And that's exactly what it is. Arrian took the core principles from the Discourses and distilled them into a short, practical guide that you could, carry with you and consult every day. It's the ultimate field guide to Stoicism.
So this philosophy, written down by a student, then starts to spread. And it reaches the highest levels of power.
It's another incredible irony. The teachings of a former slave become the go-to philosophy for the Roman elite. We know that even while Epictetus was alive, his fame was huge. Important people would travel to Nicopolis just to talk to him.
Including an emperor, right?
Emperor Hadrian. He was known to be friendly with Epictetus, and it's very likely they met. And just imagine that scene. The most powerful man in the world, the emperor, seeking out a lame former slave to ask for advice on how to live.
That relationship, or at least the idea of it, became really famous later on.
It did. A text appeared in the 2nd or 3rd century called The Dialogue Between the Emperor Hadrian and Epictetus the Philosopher. It's almost certainly not a real transcript, but it was hugely popular for centuries, especially in the Middle Ages. It's basically a series of 73 questions from the emperor, with short, wise answers from Epictetus. It cemented his reputation as this great sage.
But the really undeniable link to imperial power comes a little later, with the most famous Stoic of them all,
Marcus Aurelius.
the emperor philosopher.
He is the ultimate case study. Marcus, in his own private journal, the book we now call the Meditations, directly quotes Epictetus. He thanks one of his teachers for introducing him to Epictetus's works.
And it wasn't just a casual influence, was it?
Oh no, it was foundational. When you read the Meditations, you are reading a man actively practicing Epictetan philosophy. Every time Marcus reminds himself to distinguish between what's in his control and what isn't, every time he talks about retreating to his inner citadel.
That's pure Epictetus.
It's pure Epictetus. He's taking those lessons and applying them to the unimaginable stress of ruling the Roman Empire. It is the absolute historical peak of the philosophy. A former slave's ideas on freedom being used by an emperor to rule himself.
And the story doesn't stop there. The influence just keeps going right through the centuries.
It's incredibly resilient. The Enchiridion, the handbook, just never went away. In the 6th century, a Neoplatonist philosopher named Simplicius wrote a huge commentary on it, keeping it alive in the intellectual world.
And then it has a massive revival during the Enlightenment.
A huge one. Thinkers in the 17th and 18th centuries loved Epictetus. Why?
Right.
Because he offered a complete system for living a good, rational, ethical life that didn't rely on divine revelation.
It was based on reason.
Purely on human reason and self-discipline. So guys like Voltaire, Montesquieu, Denis Diderot in France, they all read the Enchiridion when they were students. It gave them a model for secular morality, which was exactly what they were looking for.
Even someone like Blaise Pascal, who was deeply religious, was a huge admirer.
Pascal is a great example. He was a devout Christian, but he had incredible respect for Epictetus. He called him a great mind and said he was one of the philosophers who had best understood the duties of a person. For Pascal, Epictetus had basically gotten as far as any human being could possibly get using reason alone.
That's an incredible endorsement. It shows just how universal the ideas are.
It really does. It proves that a philosophy that is focused on practice, on the core challenges of being human, can cross any cultural or historical boundary. The lessons that worked for a slave in Rome worked for an emperor, and they still worked for the revolutionaries and thinkers of the Enlightenment.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's been an incredible journey. From a slave market in Turkey to the emperor's palace in Rome and beyond. Let's just quickly recap the main takeaways for everyone listening.
I think the first has to be that personal story.
Hmm?
The journey from being named Epictetus acquired to becoming this beacon of inner freedom. His life is the proof of concept.
Absolutely. And second, that core lesson. It's the one thing to take away if you take nothing else. The strict, ruthless separation of what is in your control from what is not.
You accept the externals with calm. You work on the internals, your judgments, your actions, your character, with intense, relentless discipline. That's the whole game right there.
And third, the structure he gave us, that clear hierarchy. Philosophy is about action first.
Right. Application is the king. The principles and the logic, parts 2 and 3, are there only to serve that primary goal. Living a virtuous life. Don't get lost in the theory.
Okay, so that brings us to our final thought, and it connects everything back to how his work survived. We've said over and over that Epictetus taught that philosophy was a way of life, an oral practice.
Right? It was something lived, not just read.
And yet, the only reason we have it is because Arrian wrote it down. We are reading lecture notes.
Which leads to the provocative question we want to leave you with. Epictetus himself said that part 1, the application, the actual living of the philosophy, is the most important part. But what we have in the Discourses is a record of parts 2 and 3, the reasons and the logic. We're reading the textbook, not living the practice.
So the question is, how much of the real essence of his teaching is inevitably lost in translation from a lived experience to a written text? If the whole point was the immediate practical application, what does it mean that we can only access it through someone else's notes about the theory?
It's like the difference between reading a manual on how to swim and actually jumping in the water. We have the best manual ever written. But Epictetus would say the real work only begins when you close the book and face the day. How do you bridge that gap? That's the challenge he left for all of us.